Hey everybody, it's Jeff here once again with the Money Trucker podcast, and welcome to our weekly market update. We've changed it from our Friday financial focus because we wanted to really get a little bit deeper into what was going on throughout the weeks. So these will typically be posted the next Wednesday after we record them a lot of times on Fridays. So just so you know, this will be data that's through the end of that previous week and kind of what's leading into the next week. This week, we're going to have a little bit of a discussion about the markets. The month of September was a little bit down from where we've been throughout the year. So Tom's going to have a little bit of an update on that. We're going to talk a little bit about the economics and what's going on in the economics world right now. And our most interesting thing will be, surprise, surprise, something related to shipping. So be right back with you in just 1 second. Hey everybody, it's Jeff here with the Money Trucker podcast, and I've got Tom Kemler with me with BK Wealth Consulting. Tom, how you doing?
Tremendous, Jeff. How are you?
Fantastic. Glad you're on today. And we did get a question. We love questions from our listeners. We did get a question to ask a little bit about our thoughts on the market last month. I believe that we were talking about it earlier, that we were down about 4% on the Dow side of things. And really the thoughts around, is this the signs of problems in the future, or is it just that September sucks like it always does?
Well, we had noted in several times during September that September is statistically the worst month of the year for the market indexes. Mm-hmm. I kind of wonder if, that has its roots. I've always believed anyway, my own theory, that it had its roots in some of the timing of the harvest earlier in our country. And, basically, September was, you bring your goods to market, and that you'd have to, all the farmers, which was most of the country, would have to pay off their debts that they'd incurred at the general store all during the year. And if the harvest didn't add up, there would be financial repercussions, and it would roll through the market. More recently, I've added in another layer to that, and that's that there's a lot of people, a lot of parents that have to liquidate a lot of stocks to be able to afford college and school. I mean, it's a really huge number. And so
with it going up 7% a year, yeah.
I mean, that's a transfer payment. So the parents have to liquidate. They send the money to the colleges. It goes through the college machine, and then it ends up in the endowment machine, which then goes back into the market. But it takes a while for it to flow through there.
Interesting way of looking at it. I had never thought of it that way, but
well, in some places in this world, some places in this country, there are really expensive kindergartens.
Yep.
And a lot of the elite class that owns a lot of financial assets, whether the kids are in elementary school, high school, or college, there's just an enormous amount of money in the aggregate that has to be spent on that. So you layer that on top of things like, the timing of the harvest, and and the harvest itself. I've got a thing about farm prices in here. That's an enormous export for the United States.
Sure.
It's one of the few things that we really make money on. So in terms of import export, so it's still an important thing. It's not quaint at all. It's just that it's limited in the sense that there are so few people that are farmers now compared to where they were a century ago.
Mhm.
But
Yeah, now it's huge farms pretty much,
and to answer the question, so the question is, first of all, we're answering that September is a historically bad month. This September was kind of okay, but more than half of the loss for the month came in on the last day.
yeah.
And so does that make it any less meaningful? I would answer that two ways. The first is, I'm kind of a weather geek, so I have kept a personal Excel spreadsheet of rainfall for 20 years now.
Why does this not surprise me at all?
And you'd be surprised how many times you get rainfall on like the 30th of the month or the first of the month, and you go back and you look at a a particular cell of a month and a year, and it's just a number, and there's no context there as to whether or not that rain fell evenly across the month, or all of it came in at the beginning or the end, or what have you. So to some extent that applies here. Even though it happened on the last day of the month, and really half of it was in the last hour.
Mm-hmm.
So we really had a tail off that was big yesterday. And so but I mean, when you put it into all of the models that say, okay, what is the worst month? The worst month is September. It doesn't matter if it happened on September 1st or September 30th. So
Sure. Yeah.
it happened. This September, we ended up, just a small correction, it wasn't on the Dow, is in terms of the Dow Jones Total Market Index, which tries to have everything in it. We were down about 2.5%, and more than half of that came yesterday. But that's still, we still had a bad month, and statistically, this September goes down as a worse than average September. So that has implications. Octobers are typically a volatile month. We've had obviously some of the the crash in 29 and 87, and a number of other October bad days throughout the years. And so even with October's volatile, but not as uniformly negative as September is. But layered into that is that if you have a bad September, the statistical odds of having a bad October grow substantially. So that is something to be concerned about. And that's going to segue into the first chart that I have, which I'm going to call up now. And that is an update on our fear and greed index, which I hope you can see. It was just 1 week ago that we were pointing out that the fear was pretty developed. So we're in extreme fear right now. And I've always looked at this particular index as a negative indicator, or a reverse psychology indicator, that if everybody's loaded for bear and things are concerned about extreme fear, that it usually doesn't come to bear. The greed is when I'm worried, when we're at extreme greed. But if we're at extreme fear, there's a lot of hatches that have been battened down already. So I think a lot of people were concerned about September. This number is a lot lower than it was yesterday based on what happened yesterday. But if you look at the markets today, it's a mirror image of yesterday, and it looks like that, at least in terms of magnitude, we're gonna rebound about as much as we dropped yesterday. So with some of that end of the quarter window dressing, maybe. I do tend to, I tend to diminish the idea of window dressing. Not that it doesn't happen, but I always kind of wonder, like, well, what's the motivation that felt like people had to do this at the end of the month? Were they squaring things up because they were over levered? Uh, they had too much exposure. They didn't want to show their investors that they had that much exposure. So, um, even though it may be driven by the calendar and the end of the quarter, and therefore what people want to show, they're still like, well, why did they want to show it? And that, I think, does come into play with, okay, well, obviously in the aggregate, the market felt like they wanted to show that they owned less stocks yesterday.
Yeah.
And so, whatever was underlying that still, it could have been technical positioning, or it could have been just a general, imbalance between buyers and sellers. But the imbalance was there. And so I do basically, give every bit the weight to what happens on the last day of the quarter as any other day. It's just a little bit more pronounced when you see it on the last day of the quarter. And then, obviously we're seeing a reversal of that today. So I guess to wrap it up, I feel like this particular metric, this fear and greed index, that is showing a lot of concern, that this is the kind of worry that you'd like to see in the aggregate, that indicates that there is a lot of caution. And if there's a lot of caution, then it doesn't surprise me that we're having a big day to the upside. So
All I want to know is there the ability on that chart to go plaid?
to go plaid, I don't know.
Do we go plaid either, on the extreme fear side or the extreme greed side? So
As the closest we came to plaid was in around St. Patrick's Day of 2020, which was, peak COVID panic.
mm-hmm.
During the and I've watched this index for a long time. The tech meltdown of the early 2000 to 2002, the financial crisis of 08, 09. Nothing ever got. Yeah, I mean, in those cases, I would see numbers, the lowest numbers on the most panic days, I would see like at 7 or 8.
Okay.
There was a day in and around March 17th of 2020 where I saw this was a 2.
Wow. We were plaid at that point. Yes.
That was, and on the extreme greed side, I've never seen. I can't remember the highest number I've ever seen, but I mean, these things are skewed towards, 50-50 is kind of it's not really the middle. I would put the middle somewhere around 40 to 45.
Okay.
Because I don't think I've ever really seen anything above 90.
All right.
So it's definitely not a mirror. Whereas I've seen a number of single digit, the lowest decile I have seen on a number of occasions, but I can't remember seeing anything over 90. But anyway, I had a couple, want to breeze through a couple of economic indicators. And, I used to order these in terms of positives and negatives, but I think there's probably some nuance to almost every one of these indicators as to whether or not, well, is this really positive or is this really negative? And you'll see what I mean when we get into this. Like, construction spending. Now, this was negative, in my view. The consensus was for a bit of an uptick. It missed the consensus range. The year over year number looks pretty spiffy though still. And so for some people, when they look at real estate and homes, and there's a number of those reports in here, the question is, it was cooling off maybe a little bit good. And so, I don't know about that. Construction is probably the most exposed to the kind of inflation that we've been seeing. So I'm not surprised to see that things eased up in August. But this is a miss if you're just looking for strength in the economy. The farm prices number, though, this was what we were talking about with our exports. Year over year, the farmers are knocking it out. Now, part of the reason with farm prices is there was a pretty big drought this year, particularly in the upper Midwest, the Dakotas, that has crimped production. There was also some production crimps in Russia and Brazil. So, worldwide, farmers are getting a lot better prices. And just to clear up any confusion about the name, this isn't the price of a farm like per acre. This is what the farmers get for their crops. And so year over year inflation at the farmer level is 26%. So when folks see prices going up in the supermarkets, this is a big reason why, because every food every part of the food chain is literally, and I use this word most deliberately, they are eating this. This is at the front end, and it is just gonna it gets shoved through the system. PMI, on the other hand, again, the ping pong, this was a little weak. Still a really strong number, but it did miss consensus and miss the range a little bit. That's Purchasing Managers Index. A few weeks ago, we were talking about the differences between consumer confidence and consumer sentiment, and I mentioned that there was a nuance. Well, this was one of the months, one of the weeks in which they both reported. So we get a chance to put them together side by side. So the consumer confidence number, this is a number that is maintained by an organization called the Conference Board. And the Conference Board publishes a number of economic indicators. Not all economic indicators are produced by the government. There's a lot of them like this that come from, sources that have been private sources that have been putting it out for a long time. The Conference Board number missed. The prior one was revised upward quite a bit, but it had been expected to rise a little bit. It missed both the consensus and the consensus range. Now, I'm going to go over here to, I thought I had my consumer sentiment. There it is. I must have gone past it. Whoop. Where's my sentiment number? I thought I had them together. I apologize. This is the University of Michigan number that was had a big drop back in July, and it rebounded a little bit in August and a little bit more in September. So jumping back real quick to this Conference Board number, it's possible that this number, which, forget about the absolute values here because there's different construction elements into the report, but it's possible that this Conference Board number is picking up a little bit of the weakness that Michigan picked up, back in the summer. But it is interesting to see that the Michigan number came in a little bit stronger than both the consensus and the consensus range. So for me, sticking these wholesale inventories, I don't know how that got in the middle. This is another number, though, that is a little bit of a head scratcher because we're hearing about all these shortages, and how inventories are running down, and yet the numbers are not showing that. And in particular, this is a big increase. This is a increase of 1.2%. I've been following inventory numbers for decades, and these are typically numbers that you see in the 0.2, 0.3 area. Obviously, in the past year and a half, we've seen a lot of really big waves of things that have been, out of line with historical precedent. So normally you would say, well, 1.2% increase in wholesale inventories is horrible. I mean, that's like nobody's buying stuff. The pipeline is getting stuffed, but yet there's all this anecdotal talk about how shelves are bare in the stores, and just as an aside, the retail inventories number was like 0.1 up. So that's a typical thing, and it's also not showing, at least in the numbers, that what people are reporting anecdotally, which is there's a lot of shortages. So it's tough to kind of characterize this number as to whether it's really positive or really negative, because there's a lot of concern that economic growth is going to suffer because people aren't buying things because they don't have the ability to buy them because the inventory is not there. Here we're seeing that wholesalers are building inventories, and they're building them a lot, which in a normal period of time wouldn't be good either, because it would be like, well, nobody's buying anything. So these are strange times, and I'll just have to leave it there. I hope I described both sides of the equation, and we'll leave it there. I had to put this corporate profits number out again. This is the revised number. I put this out a few weeks ago when they. This is Q3 or Q2 released yesterday. So when you're looking at year over year numbers, it just these numbers were reported last month, and so they've been revised. This is the final revision for Q2 corporate profits. So again, Q2 is April through June, obviously. So April through June of 2020 was really the bottom of the market as far as corporate activity goes for COVID. So, but it just goes to show, like, these are enormous numbers. I mean, coming out of any recession, whether it was the recessions of the early 90s, from the first financial crisis, if you will, the savings and loan crisis, the tech bust in early part of the century, the great financial crisis a decade plus ago. Those are all recessions that I not only lived through, but I was in the financial services industry for. Mm-hmm. So I was paying attention to this stuff. And I still never saw numbers like this bouncing out of a recession. I mean, this is remarkable increase. This, we had talked a little bit about, there was a lull in home construction and the home real estate market that developed in late spring and lingered for a couple 3 months. It's back in gear. This home sales index number was a blowout. The prior number had been negative. That was one of the ones. That was July, and we had noted that at the time. This consensus was for a little bit of a rebound, but I mean, look at this. I mean, we came in, just blew away the consensus in the consensus range. Mm-hmm. Durable goods. I don't like to look at durable goods too often because they're so volatile. But what I recall about durable goods lately is that they have not been following what happens a lot of times with them, is they ping pong between positive and negative, and it takes you having to look at several months for a trend. This year we've seen durable goods actually surprising to the upside most of the months of the year. This is for August. I would say out of the 8, we've had it's been a 6 and 2. So and these numbers were pretty strong. The new orders month over month was above the range. The transportation number missed a little bit, but the core capital goods number came in ahead of consensus and above the range. And now we're here back to shipping, which is regular folks know that we were first on the shipping story over a year ago. We give it a lot of time, and actually we've given it so much time that we're going to give it even more time as the most interesting thing this week, because
it just keeps getting more interesting.
Well, this is a chart that I showed last week. Now, this chart was based on information from the website. Last week was, and I will name dates. Today's October the 1st, and last week when we did our show, and I showed this was a chart that we showed on September 24th. The website that I got it from had the data up through September the 20th. And I can't always get these charts because I'm kind of have to have somebody else create them, and then I give them credit. So, but what we were talking about was how parabolic things had gone in just a couple of weeks, because I had shown this chart a little while ago. So look at this number. Between at anchor and at berth, the number was, I believe it was 97, but it was short of 100. And this is as of September the 20th. This was a this was a tweet yesterday from the Marine Exchange of Southern California. It's up to 145.
Lord.
I mean, we're talking about a 50%
at anchor
in 9 days. I mean, I mean, just look at the scale on this chart. I mean, we're up here
off of the chart.
And as I mentioned last week, there are so many ships involved that there's no room to anchor these big ships anymore. So they have drift areas. So they've got a lot of these ships are just, they can't anchor because all the anchorage is taken up. So they're kind of drifting around and just waiting to get in. And so when we said that it was going parabolic, we were right. But I
didn't think it would be in a week.
The Spinal Tap, this is 11. No, this is beyond 11. This is 145.
Two movie references in one show. We got the Spinal Tap and Spaceballs. So,
absolutely.
It's insane.
Here's a series of headlines that I pulled off of Bloomberg that had something to do with it. So this is on the surface, what you're seeing is energy prices. And we've been talking about how energy prices have been rising. But in the past week, what we've seen is we've got it now a crossover to where the problems in shipping are both causing and effect with energy. And how is that working? Well, in some cases, the power shortages are just literally shutting down ports and not allowing them to either load or unload ships. And so, what seems to be the price? Well, part of it has to do, and this is a little bit of an interesting angle, because the news of particularly in China of the rolling blackouts. Now, Europe's had, there was a gas crisis in Britain, and there's still concerns um, about energy prices in Europe, but the real crisis in power is in China, and they had a number of blackouts that were imposed on from the government on down in the past week that have really exacerbated the whole shipping and supply chain problem. Um, and this was one of the most disingenuous reasonings that I had ever read. Was that the first few headlines that came out, the media anymore, they're not critical and they don't really dig into stuff, so they uncritically just were stenographers to the Chinese government saying that the reason why they were having these power shortages in China was because the government was, you know, they had these mandates for cleaner energy, and they wanted, they wanted to shut down emissions. They were getting near their annual limit on emissions, and I was like, that doesn't make any sense to me. Why, but the Chinese
Like the
government, I
Chinese
mean,
care
you got to
about
give them
emissions.
marks for being savvy. They're like knowing that our press will be critical of some areas, but our press isn't really critical of China,
Yeah.
and so that they knew that they would repeat that. Um, so what they really did was that they just said, "Oh, we're shutting down energy supplies because we don't want to have too many emissions." And the implication there is, hey, we're the good guys. We're willing to, we care about the environment, and if we're emitting too much, we're gonna go ahead and just shut things down. Well, anybody who knows anything about Chinese business knows that that's just nothing could be further from the truth. That they are um, that they'll keep the businesses going. The only time that I can remember that they ever shut down any businesses was that they shut things down for a couple of weeks around the Beijing Olympics so that there wouldn't be any smog. And
Yeah.
that was a very small shutdown. They didn't want any smog around Beijing, but
And it
the rest
wasn't
of
even
the country was
smog because,
blowing and going.
yeah, it wasn't even smog. It's actually just coal dust. Because I remember a friend of mine, her son, he was over there, I guess in Shanghai or Beijing or something like that. And he worked for an American bank over there. And he was saying that they never could, or she actually was saying, they never could open their windows during the day over there because when those things are blowing, all those coal plants are just blasting out coal. She's like, if you opened up the windows to the apartment, you'd walk in later and there'd just be like a layer of coal dust sitting all over
Great.
everything. It's like, yeah, and you're breathing that in.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's the reality over there. So
Yeah.
I dug into it because I have to.
Yeah.
And finally, I mean, it was clear to me pretty quickly that they weren't shutting these plants down because they were concerned about emissions. And there was no Green New Deal operating here. They're not in the Paris Accord, nothing like that. They were shutting plants down because they didn't have any fuel. Now, what is part of the problem? Well, part of the problem here is China and Australia have been slapping at each other for months. Um, the Australians managed to have the gall to blame the Chinese for COVID, and the Chinese responded by basically blackballing Australian coal. And Australia is not only a huge coal exporter, but they're a coal exporter that's like kind of close to China.
Mhm.
So what the Chinese did was they cut off their biggest supplier. They decided not to ramp up purchases from the United States or anybody else because of whatever reason, but they didn't. And they were relying a lot on domestic production, which um, they have these strict laws or strict procedures. If there's a COVID outbreak, it doesn't matter where it is, they'll like nail everybody into their apartments and not let them out, not let them do anything. And that includes mining for coal. So they've had a tough time mining for coal and generating, getting enough coal into their hoppers, literally, to run their power plants. So I don't know how this is going to resolve itself, because if there's one thing that the Chinese Communist Party has proven, is that they have an intense amount of pride, and they are not going to swallow their pride and go to Australia and say, you know what, we really need the coal. Um, so they'll probably try to buy some more from us. Um, this gets a little bit complicated, because the ports that face China are on the west coast, and the ports that export coal are particularly in the northwest of the country. Most of the coal that would go to China comes out of Wyoming, and it would go out through like Seattle and Portland and what have you. And the locals in those areas have strongly resisted the market forces that want to expand and modernize those facilities, because it's coal. So that's a local political thing that enters into affecting some major dominoes that are falling. So and the same thing for Canada. I mean, I would argue that some of the same political imperatives that are in Seattle and Portland apply to British Columbia and Vancouver, where there are also coal export facilities that are not being modernized and expanded. So we've got a limited ability to get the product to them. The Russians apparently are mining all the coal they can, and they might try to get some there. The North Koreans mine coal, but it's not clear that they can produce enough. So this is kind of the thing, that the Australians could supply what China needs. They won't do it. My own feeling is that there will probably be some sort of complicated situation where the Australians sell it to a middleman who then ends up selling it to China. But they would have to have enough middlemen to sanitize it so that it wasn't easily traceable to Australia. But that's really what this is. This is a lack of coal. This is not and for everybody who wants to think that the Chinese are somehow environmentally responsible, the Chinese build a new coal-fired electrical plant every 3 days in that country, and have for years. So they need coal to run the country, keep the lights on, literally, and they don't have it. So this is just a bit of showing that they're even their two premier cities are finding that they don't have enough electricity. And again, this is the latest shock. It gets back to the blackouts in China are affecting shipping, and they're drawing this out, making it worse. And you have one of the world's largest shipping CEOs just saying, basically, we're still in the middle of supply chain disruptions. In this case, what we had a bad thing, and it's getting worse. And so I did get a bit out of the way. This is just a thing that I saw in Reuters, but it's kind of the conclusion, which is, why are global supply chains falling out of fashion? And of course, the fashion was a double entendre, and not just talking about fashion, but the world of fashion, and where places like Benetton are getting, where they're getting stock to sell. And it's just what we've been seeing over the last couple of years is that things are things are they're that are complicated. In a lot of cases, you would see if you had an impulse that went into the system, even if it was fairly large, that the system was lubricated and well working enough that a large disruption would be dampened at each level as you went through the supply chain, and people would not notice at the other end. And what we've been seeing really in the last year and a half, and is fascinating, but really starting to get kind of scary, is that small things. This is literally the philosophical deal with the butterfly's wing beat ending up, that it causes the dinosaurs to go extinct. But you're seeing these small impulses that, rather than being dampened as you go through each step, are being amplified. And so what you're seeing is just a huge amount of reaction to a decision that was made about a year ago by the Chinese government to say, we're going to teach you Aussies, we're not going to buy your coal. And nobody else was able to step up and supply them the coal, partly because of COVID, partly because of shipping. And now you've got a case where a shipping crisis is partly being exacerbated by a shipping crisis.
By a shipping crisis, by COVID and coal and everything else. It's just nuts.
But it's self-reinforcing. And for those involved in the physical sciences, the amplitude of modulation is increasing. So we're seeing things. This is literally like the flywheel starting to spin out of control, and pieces are flying off everywhere. At some level, you have to believe that the profit motive of all concerned, the great Thomas Paine, that people are going to start pushing supply to where it needs to be, and that these effects are going to be contained. But for right now, you have an interesting series of energy shortages, which are partly because of shipping and partly because of production constraints from COVID. Some of the shipping was related to COVID, but then the shipping circles back in and reinforces the energy shortage. So all of these things are really intriguing, and the bottom line is, if we go all the way back to our first slide, it's probably another reason why we're seeing extreme fear, at least on the part of a lot of market participants. Certainly points the way towards what I've been saying here for a while, and that is stagflation is coming. We're going to be constrained on the production side because we can't produce, and yet prices are still rising. So I think that was interesting.
I thought so too. I mean, well, but it, once again, you start to see how all these things start to affect each other, and it just seems to keep, you just seem to keep snowballing and snowballing and snowballing. But I mean, just that parabolic rise of the ships out in LA, and that's just LA. That's not all the other ports around the world.
Right. That's just amazing. Yeah, I mean, I know where to get that chart. Which website? It was published on a website called Freight Waves. I think Freight Waves is a great website.
Yeah.
Everybody should, if you're interested in looking at source material on shipping, that's a good one. So yeah. I got to give them credit.
You got to wonder though, at some point, I know the shipping stocks have gone up like crazy because of the freight prices and all that. But you got to wonder. I mean, they don't get paid if they're sitting out in the middle of the ocean.
No, and that's one of the reasons why
Yeah.
their rates are going up, is they're
Yeah.
taking that into account. And they're saying, a voyage is going to take twice as long, 3 times as long.
Yeah.
And so, I may not be making that much more money. I'll make a lot more per container.
Yeah.
But it's not like I'm turning it around real fast.
That's exactly
and that's the other thing that gets back to that deal about Benetton and the fashion industry, is that those certain industries are basically saying, and they're saying what we were saying here a year ago, which is, why not bring it back to the country? Bring it back to the U.S. Now, again, it's a political thing. I don't sense that our current administration understands business or is interested in pulling back business to this country, but there's certainly a motivation from the market to do so.
Sure.
We shouldn't kneecap it by raising corporate tax rates, which we're poised to do. So, that would just kneecap the whole thing, but
sure.
that's.
But I mean, I think you go back to you go back to that, though. It all sounds well and good, but typically, like in the case of something like that, textiles and that type of clothing industry and stuff like that, it's not high paying jobs, and we can't fill the 9 million that we have already at this point. So now, so we bring it back on shore and we add, let's say, another 10 million jobs. Well, you got a bunch of people who don't want to do those jobs to begin with. So, that we've got to incentivize people to go to work, and the only way that seems to be incentivizing people is to raise the wages, which then it's a never-ending cycle of screwing it up. So I really don't know what the solution is.
Well, I can say one thing: a lot of these jobs are going to end up in Mexico. When they shorten supply chains, it doesn't have to be. I wish that it would come all the way back. I mean, when America did used to have a lot of people that worked in the garment industry.
Oh, of course they did,
and made stuff, and we may yet again. But for right now, for the reasons like what you're saying, they could locate in Mexico and take advantage of the USMCA and ship into us. It would be a shorter supply chain, and it might have the benefit of giving everybody who's going through Mexico to get to our southern border, they could get a job. Pretty good jobs in Mexico.
It gives them a reason to stay right there, or if they're coming up from Central and South America, it gives them a place to stop. If you increase your manufacturing down there, you just got to get the corruption out of the system, which is a challenge.
Well,
they can't get out of their own way from a corruption.
That's not going to happen.
Yeah. Well, Tom, thank you. That was fantastic. Like I said, I was a little fascinated with that. That's just really good stuff about how all this stuff interconnects, and I think it was the most interesting thing. So thank you for being on. Thanks for doing all that work this week.
Oh, you're welcome. I can say I'm looking at we're having a ramp in the market where it's I see the Dow is up over 500. Market index, the total market index is almost 600. So
go baby, go.
Really a mirror day to yesterday. But
we'll take a mirror.
Without a doubt.
All right. Well, thank you, sir. Folks,
you're welcome.
As always, please join us on the show every week. We put a couple shows out a week, one that focuses on this and one that focuses now a little bit more on experts that we bring on to talk about just different things that are going on in the markets, and certainly different things that are going on from a planning and a financial standpoint. So thank you.
Can I just mention something? I would encourage everybody to subscribe to our channel on YouTube. I know, like, I'm a cheap guy, so when I hear the word subscribe, that makes me think like there's no money to subscribing. You can be a subscriber on YouTube. It's free. all that subscribing does is it allows you the opportunity to get a notification when this posts on YouTube, or Rumble or anywhere else. And so the subscription is probably, it's got a value, but it's free. So why not?
If you like it, subscribe to it. It makes it easier for us to get messages out to you. And if we do any special shows, which we do plan to pop a few of those out here and there, with freeing up our schedules a little bit, we can be a little bit more nimble on some of the other shows and things that might be of interest to you. So the only way you're going to know that is if you subscribe to the channel. So make sure you click that little red button that is right down below Tom, and make sure that we get that that you get in there. So thank you once again. We love questions. It helps us to formulate the shows a lot of times. So the more questions we can get, the more we can give you information directly. So please, wherever you're at, make a little note in the comments if you've got a question, and we will take those questions and we'll turn them into a show here in the future. So thanks a lot. We'll see you guys back here next week.